more comedic crime novels, you actually need a lot more plot because you need that action because you're not having it necessarily in the atmospherics. Whereas if you think of a gothic kind of crime novel, almost nothing can happen and yet you're on the edge of your seat because nothing's happened. Hi, I'm Aoife Clifford. My book is It Takes a Town and I'm published by Ultimo Press. It gets described as a cosy crime novel, but it depends on what you think cosy crime is. So it is a fun, twisty crime adventure about a murder of the most famous resident in a country town. It takes an entire town to solve the murder, which suggests a bit that everybody's holding a piece of the puzzle, but only when they start talking to each other and putting them together will they work out what happened. I was quite interested in taking some of the very sort of typical crime characters and putting them all together. So there is the police procedural part, that's Carol, which also makes sense because it is a murder. So you're going to have police who are trying to solve it. But then also I had a lot of fun with it. So there's like a Miss Marple type amateur detective who's also very interested in what happens and is very observant about what's been happening in the town altogether. And as Carol is a new arrival in town, she's going to rely on some people who know the town and the characters in it better. And then there's also other people that are just affected by the death, including the family and friends of the victim. So it's a story told from quite a few different perspectives, which was a really fun thing to do. Vanessa is, she's someone who was most famous when she was a young person, and she's becomes famous as a little child tap dancing across a biscuit in an ad that goes viral before things went viral. But then sort of has that kind of quite familiar trajectory of, I mean, Katie, you might not know of Young Talent Time, but that was a very big kids' talent show in Australia. So it's that sort of equivalent, which would feel very familiar to a lot of people, especially back in the day when you only got 2 channels on your TV, so that you would just be watching Young Talent Time on a Saturday. And then going into the soaps. And so having that trajectory where everybody in Australia knows you, to then what happens after that is a sort of the slow glide down on the fame, kind of roller coaster. But of course, she's someone who remains completely ambitious and sort of wants to work out how to become famous again. So she ends up back in her town of Welcome, where she is the most famous person there, so her fame there hasn't diminished, and is sort of plotting what she's going to do next. And she's got all sorts of ideas, including maybe she might run as a kind of Teal-style independent in the next election. When sadly then she's killed, so her political ambitions come to naught. Often my books start because of just sort of 2 ideas that I've got that are completely different from each other and push them together and see what happens. But this time around, I did start with the thought of characters, which is the first time for me. And the character, I was really interested in exploring a long-term female friendship. So I knew I wanted to have 2 people who are best friends who are very different, and to then see that this is really going to be the moment of, potential fracture or definitely a lot of pressure being put on that friendship. So that was one starting point. And then the other starting point was to do with Vanessa, which was I was quite interested in exploring fame and what fame does to a person, particularly if they become famous very young in life, really before your character's almost formed. But also, what does it do to all the people around you? What do you get away with? Is it actually good for you? Why we have this burning desire to be famous, and yet really most people who are famous seem quite miserable. So just exploring all that idea of human nature was really sort of fascinating. So they were my 2 starting points. Frankie and Mer, who are the 2 best friends, are sort of now in their late 40s, and they became best friends at school, even though they're sort of completely different characters, but which is, one, not uncommon at school, but also not uncommon in country towns where you don't have necessarily that you find that perfect person who's interested in the same things as you. You've sort of got to find your friendships with who's there. And that's the classic for their kind of friendship. They were friends with Vanessa, the person who ends up being the victim, but she goes on to fame and fortune. So Frankie is now the local school teacher teaching back at the high school that she went to, and sort of happily married with 2 kids. And for her, the life is good. Mer is kind of a bit of a hot mess. So she was a really talented swimmer, but I sort of wanted that whole idea of her moment of fame fell apart very early because of injuries and also maybe economic circumstances, that she didn't have all the support to go on and follow her dreams, but sort of now is in town. She works at the supermarket. She's kind of quite an acerbic character. She's got a pretty dark sense of humour, and she probably drinks a bit too much. Her relationships haven't stuck, so she has gone through a few relationships. She has kids too. They've got older, and she's kind of probably, without even realising, a bit in a moment of flux and crisis with what's going on with her life. But I wanted them to start at the start of the book, that the nature of the relationship is Frankie is the person who picks up the pieces when Mer kind of loses it, but it also worries a bit that she might be enabling some of Mer's outrageous behaviour, because Mer will always know that Frankie's there to back her. But as the book goes on, without getting into it, I also wanted those roles to kind of reverse, and what both of them think they're doing for each other, or the problems that they have, to actually flip over, and that we see what happens, when life suddenly, turns around 180, which happens, I think everybody probably has that experience in their life, and to actually have that moment of, everything that you thought was completely wrong. But I just, one of the starting points I was really interested in was, I thought that really a loss of kind of one of those foundational friendships is probably one of the most devastating things that anyone can go through. And there's sort of, people not quite have the expectation, but there's an understanding that your marriage or your, the relationship that you have with your partner could well break down. And we've kind of got all formalities and words around that and an understanding around that. Whereas something about it which could be equally as devastating, there's really no kind of words or formality or structure around a loss of a friendship, which I think really probably is one of the most devastating things that a person can go through in their life. Plotting is important in any crime novel. And yeah, I probably went into it a bit naively. So I thought this is going to be great, because whenever one character's getting a bit too boring, I'll immediately go to another character, add an exciting bit, and so you can keep that all running on. So obviously it's not nearly as easy as that. And also, one of the things I discovered about plotting, which was interesting, which I wasn't expecting, was when you're injecting a bit of humour into something. For a crime novel, that is tricky too, because part of it is tension. And if you're undercutting tension, then how do you rebuild tension? So that made me realise that with sort of more comedic crime novels, you actually need a lot more plot, because you need that action, because you're not having it necessarily in the atmospherics. Whereas if you think of a gothic kind of crime novel, almost nothing can happen, and yet you're on the edge of your seat because nothing's happened. So it keeps that tension up quite high. So there were some real things that I learnt, but that's what I love about writing, is doing something different each time and learning and sort of expanding my knowledge. So for me, I always do a lot of edits. So what is a total hot mess at first draft hopefully will get better and better as you keep drafting on. And this one, it took a while to settle everything down, and also not sort of go around in circles where one character in one chapter knows something. How does the next character in the next chapter not have to learn that again? And so you just get caught. So there's definitely some kind of writing techniques and things like that I found really interested. It was really interesting to learn and kind of implement them. I don't have kind of that, a police kind of chart with red string going everywhere across it. But maybe I should have. That might have cut out an extra draft. I really like teenagers, because this will be probably the third time I've had substantial teenagers in my books, I think. So I love it because they're sort of, you're at that moment of starting of independence and character and sort of strong ideas, and you haven't yet buttressed up against the world to kind of wear them down. And so I absolutely so I love that time of life. I just think it's such a fascinating sort of time to visit. And also because that's where Mer and Frankie at the same age became friends. It was sort of an echo of that again, that you're best friends at school, but are you really best friends, or are you just sort of geographically in the same place? Will you remain friends for life like Frankie and Mer have, or will you, like once school's gone, you head off in your different ways? So that kind of the chopping and changing of relationships there. And also I was really interested in exploring a murder in a town and seeing all the rippling out effects, but also how it affected different generations. And if you're not the generation that's in charge, so say Carol, and there's Frankie as a school teacher, even Mer in her own way, but there's other characters in the town like the local politician. They're all the people that are actually in charge and sort of taking responsibility for what's happened. Whereas other generations in the town also want buy-in and have got something to say about it. And the teenagers have got something to say about it. And also Janet, who's the Miss Marple character, has also got something to say, but she's the generation above. So they're sort of powerless. And then what do they need to do to get attention and to kind of reclaim power? I was quite interested in sort of exploring that. It was fun and a nightmare depending on the day. So the first draft for me, that's probably the nightmare bit, is finding the story. And then I always feel a lot happier once that first draft's done, because then I always know it can be made better and there's something there now, rather than having to do that real act of creation. So probably that's the stressful part for me. And then I'm quite happy to just sit there and keep improving and writing. And that's when the fun really kicks in. Because you can, rather than have to focus on this big, massive sort of global picture, you can just sort of hone in and have your fun, focusing on a small part or a particular character or something like that. I mean, I did have a lot of fun writing it. It was fun to kind of be actively trying to think. Often, I hope there's sort of a level of humour in all of my novels, but quite a lot of that gets edited out, because what I find funny in a first draft, by the time I've read it 8 times, doesn't seem as funny anymore. So often that would get pulled out, whereas this time I sort of lent in to keep it in there. And so that was a fun thing to do. So I'm just amusing myself. I can always see the through line, which is, say, like there's an element of writing teenagers again, or there's some particular thematic things. But I do make a conscious effort to write something quite different each time. And some of those things are really, maybe a reader's not going to notice, but I know. And then some of them readers definitely will notice. So here, sense of humour, as we sort of said, but also writing from a multiple characters perspective was quite fun to do, and to so they were definitely 2 different elements that I really enjoyed having to get my mind around. So it doesn't make it easy, and I can definitely see the attraction of writing a series where you're going back to a world you've already created. So that, but I like the challenge. I'm not writing something right at the moment. I'm sort of taking some time to think about what comes next, but I'm talking actually with a friend who's a screenwriter, that we might write something jointly, just to give that a go as something different. So, yeah, watch this space. Beautiful. Always lovely to be here, Katie.